Hello, everybody.
You got it.
We are recording.
Good evening, and welcome to CKLS Trustee Training. Tonight's trustee training is something a little different. We are talking about some aspects of intellectual freedom, which most people think intellectual freedom, and that word is always associated with book challenges or censorship of materials. And so tonight we're going to dig a little deeper into the other aspects of intellectual freedom. And tonight we're going to have 4 different topics for you to hear from. So you're going to get the full CKLS show tonight because you've got 3 different presenters. You'll hear a little bit about copyright. You're going to learn about how important library access is. The most important, in my opinion, of all the tenets of library profession is patron privacy and confidentiality. And then we're going to end our evening on a high note with how to handle situations when law enforcement comes calling with questions about library records and patrons. So I'm going to let my colleagues introduce themselves, and then we're going to roll back to me.
Hi, I'm Gail Santee. It's nice to be with you tonight.
Hi, I'm Liz Jucolo, and I'm happy to be here.
Lacey?
I am Lacey, and I am the office assistant here.
Michael?
I'm Michael Adamic, and I work with the catalog and technology stuff.
And I'm Patty Collins, and I'm a consultant here at CKLS, and it's my pleasure to get us rolling. So, Miss Liz, can you pull up a slideshow for us?
Absolutely.
We give Liz the hard work to do. Gail and I sit here and look pretty.
I mean, not that you're not pretty.
She is pretty. Okay.
So our first slide is a little bit about the relationship that the system, we often call CKLS just the system, is the system has with both the librarians and the board members. It's a little bit of a triangle. When we work, CKLS works with both library trustees and library staff equally. And so we find that relationship between library board members and library staff goes up and down, but CKLS brings in information, education, and training. And so we work equally for both of you. So we want you all to know that the 800 number that I'm going to pop in the chat here in a few minutes is available to you all. So if you have a question about are you doing all the things right on your board? And if some of you might know that you're not, and you want to ask a question, don't hesitate to use that 800 number. Or if a director has questions, they're pretty comfortable with calling that number. So we think it's important that the library board and the director work together, and we get to be the helpers on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move into copyright. Basically, copyright is the legal right given to an author, an artist, a musician to own their own intellectual property. That's simply what it is. So there are a few tips that we want you to have. I'm not going to read you the whole slide because this is going to be information that's available, but there's some things you can do. You can read a whole story in story time. That's not against the rules. You can even project and show images. However, you can't read the book on the radio. You can't video it for TV, and you can't put it on YouTube because you don't own it. You might own the physical copy of the book, but you don't own the rights to the book. And so that's one of the things that we got a little clever with during the pandemic. But now we've had to roll back and follow those rules.
I'd say we were pretty loosey-goosey with those rules during the pandemic.
We had permission.
We did have some permissions, and you'll notice at the bottom, the permissions actually come from generally the publisher, not the author. So if you're Stephen King or John Grisham or Mo Willems, sure, you can get on the radio and read whatever you want from your own work because your publisher isn't going to argue with you. But most works are actually owned by a publisher, not by the actual author, because copyrights get renewed long after authors die. And so some things that you can do, you can display authored quotes on your wall, but you can't share a recording that you've made of something, and you can't copy an entire book. Next slide, please. This is the area where it gets things a little funky. Actually, you might not realize that if you watch the Chiefs on a Sunday and you have a bunch of people there with you, that's okay because they understood that you're watching it at home, and that's okay. But if you watch all the way through the game, at the very end, it'll say, this is the property of the NFL and has exclusive rights and privileges, blah, 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 blah. Basically, if you're sitting in a sports bar and they're showing it, they're actually infringing on copyright. So it's something to know, but you know, the NFL isn't going to shut down the sports bars because they need them. CKLS actually provides a movie license for member public libraries, to show films in their library, and you have to follow the rules of the movie license. People think because it's on Netflix and I have a Netflix account, I can show it in that form. You actually have to have a physical copy of the library to show it in the public library, and you have to have it something that's followed by the movie rights. Netflix, Prime, Paramount, none of those at this time are currently covered by a film license. The only items that are covered by a license right now that are streaming services is Canopy, which Canopy does allow a section of their showings to be available for what we call public performance. And that's what we're doing when we're actually using a program, movie program. And then the next slide is about digitizing newspapers. So the copyright lines for books, music, other print are all different. But the one thing they did establish was a time period for newspapers. So anything published before 1929 is technically in what we call the public domain, which means it has existed longer than the copyright holder's life. And so it can be digitized without any question of copyright. Things that are before 1978 and after 1929 that have the copyright symbol are in the public domain, and most of those can be done without any question at all. Local newspapers didn't realize until very recently that they had to worry about copywriting their information. And so libraries can make that decision to digitize their local newspapers, but I would recommend before they do that, they look at the depository through the Kansas State Historical Society, because there are many area newspapers that are already there, and they're searchable and they don't cost anything. So if you have more questions about this, I'd be happy to talk with you. Next slide, please. This is the big one. On every library photocopier, there should be this statement. Basically, this is the promise that I'm not going to photocopy something that I don't own. And so in terms of a book, if you photocopy a couple of pages to show at story time, that's okay, but I can't photocopy the whole book. If I copy a poem out of a book, that's completely okay. The one thing that people forget about most is music scores. In school, you might have been reading off a photocopied version, but that was for educational purposes only, and likely they had permission to do it. But if a patron comes up to me and they have a music book and they ask me to photocopy it for them, I'll say, you can do that yourself. And I point out the sign and remind them that that is an infringement, because music scores are the one thing that have, for lack of a better word, a higher level of copyright than anything else, because that whole score is often on a page or two. And then the last, I know I've gone through this quickly, but the last slide is a definition of what public domain is. And so I'm going to use the example of one of my favorite books from my childhood. The series by Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House Books, technically because she has passed, and by when the works were written, only all but the very last book is would technically be out of back in the public domain. However, the publishers have continued to renew those copyrights. So just because it's older than 1929 doesn't mean it's automatically in the public domain. So once that ends, you have the right to copy that item. And that's why you find so many things appearing on Google Books, out there on the internet for nothing. A lot of things are there in that format, but it's important to not automatically think that because an item it was written prior to 1930 that it's automatically there. So I've provided a few links on a few slides. Copyright is one of the areas that I'm passionate about, and if you want to know more, tonight was just kind of a dip in the water. Yes, Gail, I might be able to answer your question.
Can you touch briefly on yearbooks?
Oh,
Just
okay.
briefly.
Yes. So I had to ask this question several times, and I learned that the school is the owner of the copyright. However, the publishing company still has to sign off on the digitizing. They're very expensive to digitize, probably more so than most things because they're primarily photographs. I would recommend that if you're looking at digitizing yearbooks, you use a reputable source. Don't just sign up for Bob's Yearbook Company, and contact CKLS, and we'll help you get to a reputable place, and know that this might be a project that you can only do a couple years at a time. But
And the older your yearbooks are, the more expensive they are to copy because they have to be handled very carefully.
And the newer stuff, a lot of it now is actually coming with a digitized file. If you use a reputable source like LifeTouch or Jostens to actually have it printed. So that step is actually happening more. And now everything post 2020, now those are actually where you can link on your yearbook now. So they're not old like us. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about copyright. I'm going to turn this over to Liz for the exciting subject of patron access.
Oh my gosh, you guys. Yeah, patron access. It's really exciting. I'm actually gonna kind of wake you up. Not that Patty wasn't scintillating and all that wonderful stuff, but we're gonna have an activity and I'm gonna ask you a question and you're gonna go to a link that I've posted in chat. And I would like to know, what does accessibility mean to you as a library trustee? And you go to this link that I have in chat, you just click on it, and then you can enter in a couple words.
And
I will
if
bring
you're a
that up.
librarian, you can do that too.
If you're a librarian, you can do it too. CKLS staff,
Anybody
you
can
can do
play.
it too. Okay, the first word, we have equity. And so what is fun about these word clouds is that the more responses we get, the more words pop up. And the more of the same words, the bigger the word gets. So you can kind of see a couple are coming in, and you can put as many words as you want. Equal access, diversity, those are really good. Flexible, that's a very good term. Privacy. And when I was doing, like putting together all these slides, I noticed how interconnected it is to like pretty much everything that a library does. Availability, says Krista Smith. in chat. Yeah. We'll give it another minute or so. And so I want you kind of to keep these, open. I want you to keep these terms in mind as we kind of go through the slides tonight. Open vital. That's a good one.
It's interesting to me, Liz, when I want to define it, what I really want to do is say what it isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's kind of tricky for me to think about.
And you can do is not, and then your word. Okay. Well, thank you. We have another question coming up later. So is not limiting. There you go. So you can kind of see they're all a little connected. They're all about everybody being able to get to stuff. It's flexible, it's open, it's accessible, it's about equity, it's willing, not discriminatory. Yeah. Very cool. Thank you. And you can keep adding on to these. We can look at them at the end, but I want to get scooting along. So share this again. We'll go to my next slide. So I want to start with access is that libraries are not centered around books like the picture says or the slide, but they're places of discovery and knowledge. The most important thing that they contain is the librarian. It's not just about all the books that people have access to, but it's having that librarian there to help them get access to the information that they need. And one of your duties as a board member is to hire a qualified and competent and enthusiastic librarian, but that librarian has to be willing to uphold the values and ethics of our profession. And that librarian's duty, part of that is to help defend that First Amendment of the Constitution. That means that they're providing access to information to people who need it. But there are a lot of challenges along the way with access. And we're going to go over some of those ways that you can help as a board member. And one of those, again, is hiring a really good librarian. What makes a library inaccessible? So this is another one. You go to that Minty in chat. I will repost that. So what do you think makes a library inaccessible? And you can go to the second page. If I stop jumping ahead, we're going to go to our next slide. And if you want, you can just post them in chat. Tight spaces, yeah. Hours, definitely. A big desk, taking up all the space. Exclusivity. Unwelcoming, yeah. Have you ever gone into a library and there's just like a giant desk as soon as you get there, and then there's signs everywhere saying what you can't do? That's very much a, oh, maybe I don't belong here. Very unwelcoming. Or anywhere, like, have you walked into a courthouse lately? Big, broad angles and very high desks. Heavy doors, yeah. And one of those things, grouchy faced librarian. Yes, your librarian, believe it or not, can be one of those things that makes a library inaccessible. So some of the other things, as you're putting them in, a lot of those things tie to like technology, physical and mental health of both either the patrons or the librarian, people's culture, their religion, politics, their work, education, if they have the ability, like their socioeconomic status, like how much money do they have to spend on gas to go into town, to go to work? If they're a kid, how can they get to the library if it's not within walking distance? Get your blank and get out. Yeah, there's limited options, no children, very pretentious. There's no color, it's all drab. Yeah, small town politics, that's a big one too. I know our rural areas, we have quite a bit of that. No wheelchair access, very much so. And so also, and I know it's hard to believe, but sometimes it can be the board members. I know you don't want to hear this, and I know it's probably never happened in a Kansas library ever, but sometimes the board members and how they try to manage the library conflicts with what the librarian's vision is, and they don't work together and they clash. And so that will actually be a huge downer on library accessibility. So
Patrons.
what we can do is that as a board coming to educations like these, that can help you and asking your librarian, encouraging your librarian staff to go to continuing education. They can be introduced on topics that cover this stuff. Right now, the State Library of Kansas is kind of paid for Ryan Dowd's training for like most of Kansas or all of Kansas. He's an amazing presenter. He has years of experience working in homeless shelters, and he has a ton of content out there on the state page, but we also have a ton of training on our continuing education page, both for trustees and librarians and other staff. One of the things that you want to do is that if you do have a really great librarian, you want to make sure that they're getting paid well. And you want to make sure that they understand that you value them. Now, if you have a librarian that is not, excuse me while I click all the wrong buttons, if you have a librarian that's not quite fitting for you and they're not really capable of doing their job, you need to have a talk with them as a board, not individually, not one-on-one, because you as a board work in a corporate body. And that means that you can't go in as an individual and tell the librarian what to do. But get together as a board, decide what needs to be changed. Talk to them about that change and tell them that they need to do these steps to get better, or you're going to have to let them go. And you give them the chance to change. If they change, then great, that's awesome. Then you guys can move forward. But if they don't, you need to let them go and let them start searching for another opportunity to excel at what they may be better at doing. And then you guys can find a different librarian that can excel in the place in your library and in your community.
If you have the feeling that that's something that needs to happen at your library, but you don't know where to start, remember CKLS, because we work with library boards to help improve libraries. And frequently it will fall to us to make sure that librarian might have the training they need or the training that they don't have. And we can help you set up an action plan and an improvement plan and things like that. That we do this kind of work.
Yep. And one other thing that can make your library inaccessible, and we kind of touched on that, is the building. Location, location, location. This isn't an actual library. This is just a wonderful picture of an old building many of us have seen on our daily jaunts or just driving out to another town. But the thing about Kansans is that we understand an aging building. The pipes are going out. The AC doesn't work. The electricity was like wired in the 30s. The list goes on and on and on. But as a board, one of your other duties is that you have the legal authority by the state of Kansas to secure a building for your community, for your library. So that means you may have to find a new building to rent, or you may even have to start that process of looking for grants if you don't quite have the money yet, or setting up a capital improvement plan and stuff like that, which gets touched on later. That's more advanced stuff. But you can also, not many of us have the money to do this, start planning on building a new library. That's a very, very big project. But here are some other questions to consider for your building. Where is the building located in your community? Is it in walking distance for the kids, or do they have to rely on their parents for rides? If you, what are the hours? If you are a bedroom community and most of your people drive outside of your town to go to work, what hours is your library open? Is it only open from 9 to 5 when everybody's at their day job? Or do you have some evening time? Can the doors be opened with someone who doesn't have fully functional hands? Do you have a ramp if you have stairs? Do you have an elevator if you have a 2-story building? What's the lighting like? There's just so many questions. A lot of them can also relate to children, like how tall are the shelves in the children's area? It's just, what if a person is homebound? How do they get materials? Do you actually have a drop-off service, or do they have to try to get someone else to pick up their items for them? A lot of these questions kind of touch on ADA or Americans with Disability Act's accessibility options. And here at CKLS, we also can come out and do a library evaluation. Our Kathy goes over the ADA stuff, but we will also look at your children's area and the outside of the building and things like that. So if you ever run into that, or you're curious about how your library scores, we can come out and do that. And sometimes when you're helping individuals with like disabilities, say wheelchair access or anything like that, you may come across like making things accessible for one person may make it inaccessible for others with a disability. Say someone's sensitive to lighting and they need lower lights, but you have another person who can't see that well, may have to have bright lights. So what you can do instead of trying to meet both needs at the same time is to make a reasonable accommodation to either one or both. So what you would do is you maybe provide a darker corner for the person who has the light sensitivity, maybe provide a headlamp or a corner table with a lamp, something that will have that brighter light. But you can accommodate both people without having to go to the excess of turning off all the lights or turning them all up and getting higher wattage bulbs. So another way of providing services to individuals with disabilities is through digital methods. And that's what we're going to talk about. And believe it or not, there are reasons of being, or digital services can be inaccessible for people. It's very interesting. There's tons of stuff. Digital services have really taken off in the last 20, 30 years. Access to the internet is more important than ever. I think we all learned that during the pandemic. Everybody has to have an email so that they can do job applications, get their bills paid, a bunch of different stuff. But how are you going to make an email if you don't have the technology for that? How are you going to go to your job if you don't have fast internet? In our rural areas, we tend to have those slower internet speeds. I mean, I lived for about 9 years with very, very slow internet. I mean, it was dial-up and then one step up to like satellite internet, which is maybe twice the speed. It's not good at all. But there's some encouraging grant opportunities in the past that have happened and some that might be coming up in the future. I don't have a list of those, but it's something that you as your board can look into, or maybe encourage your librarian to look into, to see if there are any grants out there to help you with getting broadband speed at the very least for your community, and making sure that maybe the Wi-Fi does reach the streets, that people can go out and sit outside the library so that they can access the Wi-Fi when you're not open. Because if you look at the numbers we've been seeing here at CKLS, a lot of the patron access computers are empty where they weren't before in like 2019. And so what people are needing now is that access to the Wi-Fi and space to charge their items, not the actual computer itself. Some still need it, yes, but not everybody. So digital content, e-content, Those services that she was talking about earlier, like your canopy and your hoopla and all that wonderful stuff, those are great services. A lot of those are on demand, so you have to pay a fee every time you check something out. Now, those are great, but they can be very pricey. You need to be aware of your price points on that. They can cost up to maybe $13 an item. I think the average is maybe about 3 or 4. Sometimes the service allows your patron, allows the library to cap the price. But oftentimes, things like Sunflower and Libby, they're cheaper because they're not on demand, but you can be put on the list for holds. And also what we're doing when we move off of Hoopla is that we're joining, what's the name of it? The preferred lender list, I think, something like that, where we can skip the holds queue. Our patrons in CKLS can skip the holds queue.
My mind is absolutely blank.
Yeah, I think
Yes,
I think
Overdrive Advantage.
Overdrive Advantage. Yes, thank you, Michael. And I think the average cost of that per item is like 89 cents, not $3, 89 cents. It's much cheaper. And not to say that I'm cheap, but hey, I like a good deal and I'm willing to wait a little bit. And you'll find that people are too. I mean, I can live without Amazon Prime and wait an extra 2 days for my package. Some people can't, that's okay. But I think for the most part, most of us can. Another barrier to digital access is filtering, but Kansas law gets involved with that because filtering content on your patron computers is necessary for at least your children's area. That's the law, that we have to make sure that they are not, how did I put this? The filter is basically there to dissuade them from looking at some of the more graphic things that they should be talking to someone else about, not looking at the public library maybe. It's a personal opinion. If you have a filter on a public library computer though, an adult is over there and they want to look at some of those things, that's where censorship kind of comes into play. And you do have to remove that filter for that adult. You don't necessarily have to remove it for the child, but you do have to remove it for the adult. Now, this kind of brings along to the process of like, who exactly are our patrons, even in our rural areas? Anyone? Why do I have a blank? Can you guys see anything?
I just see a blank
Click to the
slide.
next one. There you go.
Okay,
Oh, phew.
there we go. Did we have an extra one? That's great.
Must be.
That scared me. Okay, anyone who does not have a legal restriction can be a library patron. And this means that those sexual predators, any convicted felons, your overly friendly neighbor, people who have a different religion than you, different political party than you, the auntie that you have that really likes to crochet with cat hair, the guy who likes the worst sports team ever that sits across from you, that you wave at every day and just smile and grin and grit your teeth. Those people get to have access to the library if there is no legal restriction for them being in the library, okay? And even the noisy kids over in the corner, they're allowed to be there because it's a public area. Now, there are 3 reasons that are that have been upheld by the Supreme Court that allows a librarian to deny access to a patron. The 3 reasons are, and some of you might already know this. The first one is that they are destroying library property, be it through willful destruction, like setting the books on fire, or I don't know, bed bugs is one of them as well, and other things like that. If they're just destroying property, they throwing rocks at the window, whatever happens, that's the first one of the reasons. A second reason is that they're preventing other people from using the library. So because that kid is continuously kicking my chair, he's disrupting my ability to sit and enjoy the information that I need or my entertainment. They can be asked to leave and come back another day. or that person with a really heavy perfume, or that person who hasn't had a bath in a while. Now, they have to be actively preventing people from using the library. So unless someone complains about the smell, just kind of let it go. But however, if, and the final third reason, they're preventing the librarian from doing their job with that smell, then they can be asked to leave. And usually you want to have like a gentle conversation with the smell thing. But the kid kicking the chair, the kid knows it's acting out, or it's they. A good patron policy, and this is one of the things that you as a board can do, is write good policy or find good policy and adopt that. A good patron policy can and will address all of these topics. And we have plenty of sample policies for you on our lip guides. We will send out a link to that, or we will have the notes from the slideshow, so you will have a link. And different libraries can set different rules for their libraries. Like, say a prison library, they would have completely different rules from what a public library would have. Also, there's obviously no kicking of any chairs allowed, but also they have different things that they don't allow. Like some prisons don't allow hardback books or spiral bound books. They don't allow adventure books like D&D books and stuff like that. And that varies from prison to prison. However, prison libraries have a rising issue with banning books, just like public libraries do. I think I won't get into censorship too much because we're not really sticking on that tonight. But Florida alone has over 22,000 books that are banned just from their prison libraries, not because of hardback or spiral, but because of content. So it's not just public again or schools that are dealing with banned books issues. Again, most of the libraries in CKLS are not prison libraries. So there are several libraries in our system that are kind of the drop-off location for those prisoners once they get out, or mental hospital or something like that. Because they know, and the individuals know, that the library is where they can get help. That's where they can go to get instant internet access, to get in touch with loved ones, to find a job, to find entertainment, to look up the difficult questions, to learn about something interesting, to maybe look for a place to rent or stay, to apply for that job and all that stuff. And all those things that I just described that prisoner doing are all the things that your average library user is going to want to use the library for as well. Your library and your librarian is charged to help everyone find access to the information that they need. And so by writing policies, that's how you and your librarian know the direction of your library and how your patrons know that the rules of the library. And policies are really the safety net of the library world. Okay, so smile break. This is the first one we've had. It was a little heavy topic, but smile break is very cute. I love him a lot. I don't know what his name is, but he's adorable. Maybe someone can think up of a name and put it in chat. But going on. And okay, Miss Patty, why do we put smile breaks in?
Because the presenters need a moment to get a drink of water.
It's also because we do have to talk about heavy things, and every once in a while we need to take a breath and center ourselves so we can start again. But it is time for water. Cheers.
Cheers. And I am taking a little bit of time. So we kind of just went over like how important writing policies are. We have tons of sample policies for you. I'm going to skip through this because I'm pretty much going over. Also, what patrons can access, anything that is not considered, patrons cannot access anything that is considered illegal. There you go, by federal, state, and local. And librarians, to that point, cannot buy anything that is illegal.
That's why librarians don't buy pornography. It's
Yeah.
illegal.
It's illegal. And as a trustee, you don't really need to worry about what your librarian is buying. If you're curious about what they're buying, go ahead and visit the library. You check out their new bookshelf, you'll see what they're buying. What you really need to worry about is if the librarian can afford enough new materials to support your community. So writing budget and fixing budget and working with your librarian to find the budget for the next year is really important. A library's collection should really be a reflection of its community as a whole and a reflection of American culture as a whole. So it's not just your community you're buying for, it's from those people who live out of town and they don't see themselves in the library. All those points of access that we were talking about, the individual in the wheelchair, the person of color down the road, the kid who has been getting bullied for the last 4 years and doesn't know what to do. Those are the people that you're buying for, not just the sweet kid who wants to sell lemonade every day. Yeah, they can be the one and the same. But those are the people that your librarian should be buying for. Okay, now, next slide. I say. So what happens if someone uses the library for illegal activities? And I'm going to hand it over to Gail. You are muted, ma'am.
Here we go. Strap yourselves in. It's going to be a wild ride. We're gonna ramp it up a little bit. Libraries are public places. It's important to know that no public place is safe for children, and things can happen in libraries. And Liz went over the 3 reasons that we can ban people from libraries. I think everyone will agree that we live in a society where bad things happen and there are bad people. And sometimes that touches on the library. Sometimes it happens in the library. Sometimes it's a library patron. So what do you do if law enforcement comes knocking on the door? The first thing to know is that because of laws of privacy, all local, state, or federal officers must have a signed warrant or subpoena to retrieve patron or personnel information. They can't just say, hey, I want to find out what's going on. So if we think about the Oklahoma bombing situation in Tim McVeigh, those officers had to get warrants or subpoenas or court orders to view library records to see what the individual was using the library for, if they were using the library. This is how the law enforcement caught the BTK killer in Wichita, was through library records. He was using library computers, and that's how he got caught. Those officers came with the right legal paperwork, and they were able to access that information. Okay, Liz, go. Next. What you do in the library as a procedure and some of the policies that are approved by the board definitely affect confidentiality. Patrons have a right to expect that their information will be kept private, that we will only collect the information that we need and no more than that, and that we will safeguard that information. So keeping unnecessary records is a bad idea. And by that, I mean that if someone applies for a library card, they're going to have to show proof of identification, perhaps proof of address. And then they frequently have to fill out a paper application and they have to sign it. Sometimes libraries may want to see their driver's license and write down their driver's license number if they're adults. After that information is written or entered into the integrated library system, and we call it Pathfinder for most of us here. After that information is entered in, what do you then do with those written applications with all that information? Most of the time it gets shoved in a drawer, and then when there's a new librarian, they say, oh my gosh, CKLS, do I have to keep all this stuff? No, that information, once it's entered into the catalog, should be shredded. It should be destroyed, not just thrown away. Records retention is very important. This is not just for patrons, but also for employees. If you have an open position and you're accepting job applications, you have to keep those applications for 6 months, whether or not that individual is hired or not. You must destroy those applications after that 6-month time period. Records destruction is important. Like I said, you just don't throw it away. It needs to be destroyed. It needs to be shredded and properly disposed of. So one of the other things that can happen is that information is in public view. And so we were just at a library, Liz and I, we were at a library training on Monday, and the librarian's computer, where you can see the patron information and what they're checking out, was actually viewable by everybody else because of the way that it was located. And so what they've done is they got a privacy screen. And so when Liz and I were doing the training, I was off to the side and I could only see about 3 inches of the screen off to the side. I couldn't see the rest. You can only see what you're right in front of. And so they didn't need to move the desk. They didn't need to move the computer, but they've got a privacy screen now so that patrons can't view anybody else's information. Another thing that happens is summer library program sign up. We want everybody to know. We want everybody to be able to sign up for that. And we've seen libraries that may have a clipboard out with a sign up. Well, they're asking for children's names, their ages, or their grade, sometimes their address, sometimes their phone numbers, but they leave the clipboard there right in plain view. Remember what Liz said about people who have a legal right to use the library. Some of those people, actually all of them, have no business having that child's contact information, address, what grade they're in, and things like that. Even if it's an adult library, summer library program sign-up sheet, nobody else needs to see anybody else's business. Think very carefully. If you are having patrons sign up for computer use, are you keeping that clipboard, I'll just say again, that sheet of paper out in the open so that other people can see it? There are
keeping it for 30 years.
Yeah, and there are other ways to show computer use. And you can have your librarian contact us at CKLS, and we'll be glad to share some of the ideas that other libraries have come up with. Next slide. I think one of the very first things when we talk about law enforcement at libraries is an incident report. And so if there's an incident at the library, and that could be that 2 kids got in a fight out in the street. It could be that somebody cut themselves on a jagged edge of something. It could be that an elderly person actually collapsed and we had to call an ambulance for them. There's a lot of different things. It could be a very angry patron who directed some real choice words toward the library staff because they didn't like it that they were going to have to pay fines. When your staff are writing incident reports, it's just the facts. No opinion at all belongs in there. It's not, I think, I believe. It is, I saw, I heard. It is just facts, not opinions. KISS is an acronym for Keep It Simple, Stupid, but I prefer Keep It Simple, Sweetheart. You don't need to embellish this, just keep it just to the facts. The who, what, why, when, where, why, and how. We need to use mindfulness and discretion when we write these incident reports. We don't need to stereotype people. And we certainly don't need to use derogatory terms, just the facts. Most important on an incident report, and this is something that I don't often see, is a checkbox for, was law enforcement notified? If law enforcement was notified because of an incident in the library, we need to know who they talked to. And did they have to come to the library? And we can ask, in fact, officers for their name and badge number. They don't like to give it, but if you say that I need to have this information for my reporting purposes, they're much more likely to feel comfortable giving you that information. Go ahead, Liz. So it's best to be prepared before law enforcement ever need to come to the library. And the best way to do that is with a confidentiality policy. As boards, you should all have seen the Pathfinder privacy policy. And I can't remember what the other one's called, but it's with the Pathfinder agreement form. If you read through those carefully, you will see that we and you are required to very carefully safeguard the information that our patrons give us. Your library should have a confidentiality policy. CKLS has examples of that. After a policy is enacted, all library workers, and I say library workers because a lot of us have volunteers, or we have someone who's just here for a couple of months in the summer, but all library workers need to be trained on how to handle law enforcement requests for information. One of the things that's important to know is that a request for information generally does not need an immediate response. Next slide.
This is Patty. I'll jump in on that immediate response. Occasionally that is when law enforcement are seeking the location of a senior citizen or a child, either through a silver alert or an amber alert system, or sometimes it's a request from a parent looking for a child who they believe may be may have left without permission.
Right, right. An important thing for your library workers to know, and for you to know as board members, is that CKLS owns Pathfinder Central and all the information in it. That means that if someone comes requesting information about a patron's name, address, where they live, where they use the library, you can't give that to them. But what you can do is direct them to me, to the CKLS director. I have learned how to work with law enforcement in a way that does not give away privacy. So an example that I always give is there was a missing person in one of our counties, and the law enforcement, they were trying everything they could to find this person. It was KBI at this point. And they talked to the local libraries. The local librarians called me, and right away, then right after that, I got the call from KBI. And they wanted to know if I would share this information. And I told them, I made them tell me who it was they were looking for, because the librarians had already told me, and I had looked through the records. And I let the law officers know that it would be a waste of their time to go through the process to get a court order or a subpoena. Those are things that I have learned, and I have found a place in my ethics, my personal and professional ethics, that I am comfortable sharing some information, but certainly not all information. So during the visit, it can be very intimidating when a law officer shows up at your library and says, here, I've got a court order, or I've got a subpoena, or I've got a search warrant. It can be very intimidating. They have to have very specific information. If they're requesting library records or information with a court order, it has to say on that court order exactly what they want. We will give them that information and that information only. We will not give them any more information. If they can also come to the library and make a request without a court order or a subpoena. In that instance, we give them no information. The one example, though, is that I told them it would be a waste of their time to go through that process. They can have a request with a subpoena. Again, it has to be very specific. They can request a search warrant. Most of the time, there are much easier ways to handle the search warrant. One of the things that we train library workers is that the law officer comes in, they're looking for a truant child or a senior. We walk them through all of the all of the public spaces, and then we escort them through the private spaces. That could be the staff area, the back room, things like that. We work with law officers, but they have to have the right requests to get the information they're looking for from libraries. The one thing that I just absolutely pray never happens in CKLS is that we have a terrorism or an espionage investigation, because that's an absolute 100% gag order. Library workers cannot call their boards. They cannot call CKLS. They can't tell their husbands. There is nothing they can do. Everything is shut down, and there is nothing CKLS can do to help them. Let's hope that doesn't ever happen. Okay, Liz? There we go. It is important to know that libraries have no affirmative duty or responsibility to collect or retain information about library users on behalf of law enforcement. However, if we do believe a crime has been committed in the library should contact the police and use reasonable efforts to preserve any direct evidence of that crime. So, if we know that we have seen with our own eyes that someone is looking up lots and lots of bomb information, making bombs, building bombs, and they requested books on making bombs and building bombs, and then bombs went off, and this person is a person of suspicion and interest. My conscience would make me need to contact law enforcement and say, this is the information that I know. Now, I will not give them information that is not pertinent. And I would request that they get a court order before they come in to view that. But I would say something like this. I'm pulling it out of the air, but I would say, I believe I have information that is pertinent to this case, and I would like for you to proceed. Liz. Oh, you're muted.
Would you be giving that information as Gail the librarian?
Probably. When we train on library ethics, this is the hard spot for us. If we know something bad has happened to people, we need to share that information with the law enforcement, but we don't give away the farm.
And could you also do that as Gail the concerned citizen?
It depends. Was it Gail the librarian that saw the action take place, or was it Gail the citizen? It was Gail the librarian. Now,
Yes.
before I, as a library worker, would call law enforcement, I would talk to my library director. I would talk to my board. I would definitely call CKLS. I would talk to anybody I could to find out the way to do this the right way so that I'm not violating anyone's privacy. But when people break the law, they lose a little bit of that guarantee of patron privacy. Go ahead, next slide. So you need to have a plan of action when you're working with law enforcement. Got to have that confidentiality policy. Who's the librarian in charge? If you have more than one worker, I would say 3, when the director is not there, someone needs to be designated as the librarian in charge. That way they know that they are the point of contact. All library workers and volunteers need to be well trained on procedures for handling law enforcement requests. And we need to have a plan in place for continuity of service. And that is because when search warrants happen, computers can go missing. Not really go missing, but computers can be seized. And what are we going to do then? If there is a terrorism or espionage investigation, everything could be gone. And you're left with a building with books and some pencils and paper, and that's all. And what do you do in that case? So we need to have that plan in place. Better to plan and have it ready and never need it than to not be ready when it happens. We have documents that we will make available that go through this, very detailed, far more than what we've got time for tonight. And it says, if this, then that. And those will be tools that you'll be able to provide to your library personnel to help guide them through this process. Thank you. Yay. We went
This
a
is
little
Patty.
long.
I will say that I've been the librarian in charge, but I was never the director when this happened. And everybody's looking at you to try to figure out how to solve the problem. And your eyes are as wide as saucers. And so what I can tell you from being one of you is the more educated and the more prepared you feel is the only way that you can really handle this. And what I can promise you is you will make a mistake. You make a mistake and you move on, because freezing and doing nothing is the worst mistake that we can make. And so what is really nice that you have an 800 number where you can call someone, and most of library staff have at least one phone number of one staff member that works here, even if it's after hours for us. And so in this situation, because frankly, some of this stuff does happen on Saturday or Sunday afternoons when you're open and we're not, but you are not alone.
Yes.
Especially in regards to, as Gail mentioned, Pathfinder Central. Gail's name is the owner listed on Pathfinder.
It is. But that also means I'm responsible too. That's not the best thing. We are very adamant about patron privacy and confidentiality in Pathfinder, because I don't look great in orange. I don't want to go to prison because somebody gave away something that they shouldn't have. One of the things that I didn't touch on is security cameras. If you have security cameras in your library, you need not only a policy, but a procedure for your staff to fall back on how they will interact with law enforcement when they get requests for camera footage. But I want to thank you for being here tonight. We've dropped a lot of heavy information on you, but we've got some exciting things coming up. We are in the strategic planning process, and we very much welcome your input. We have 4 dinners and conversations, we're calling them. August 6th in Smith Center, August 8th in Scandia, August 19th in Minneapolis, August 21st in Russell. And that is a free dinner for you. But if you attend, you should be ready to participate. We need to know what you think your library is going to need in the next 4 to 5 years. We also have a programming workshop coming up on August 13th in Stockton, and Explore the Questions That Matter in Long Island on August 20th. And that one is casual and informal. And that agenda is somewhat driven by what the librarians feel the need to talk about and what's going on in their libraries. Thank you for attending tonight. Don't forget to fill out the CE verification form or let your librarian know that you've attended and they can fill that out for you.